Good afternoon. Welcome to the Coal Scene. I'm Chris Hamilton, and joining me on the set today is Mr. Jason Bostic, Vice President, West Virginia Coal Association. We're going to be talking about a myriad of issues, including a little bit of an update on first quarter 2024, some of the new rules that'll be coming out of EPA having a real dramatic impact on coal-fired electricity here within the Mountain State, and some of the other issues that are common through the industry right now. So Jason, hey, good to see you. Glad you've taken time from your schedule to join us here. Hopefully everything's going okay in your world.
Yeah, because I mean, as you know, the first quarter of this year has been somewhat challenging for not just the West Virginia industry, but across the country. Nationally, production's off about 15% first quarter 24 compared to 23. And when you come back to West Virginia, it's about 13%. We're still doing a little better than the rest of the country. But, part of that is because I think we came out of a relatively mild winter into what we typically call the shoulder season in the coal business and the electric generating business, when temperatures aren't that low nor are they that high, so there just isn't typically the demand for electricity like there typically is.
It's that time of year when you don't have the heaters on nor the air conditioner just yet.
That's
sort
right.
of 72, 75 degrees.
Yeah, and the nights just aren't quite cold enough, nor are the days just quite warm enough. But I think the problem we've encountered is we entered that shoulder season with pretty robust stockpiles around the country. Now, of course, that was after the previous year in 21, 22, when we were talking on the show, there was a real crisis around the country with our electric utilities and their stockpiles, because a lot of coal plants that would otherwise would have been running couldn't because of a lack of coal. So some logistic issues, we got those straightened out. Production returned relatively to pre-COVID levels. We got the supply chain. Of course, we had some employment issues, some staffing issues. And we rose to the challenge, maybe rose a little too good, and we've got stockpiles that we're dealing with on the electric utility side.
So last year, 2023, we finished the year with about 86 million tons, right at 85, 86 million tons. Still a lot of coal. We're still mining a lot of coal here in West Virginia.
We are. Because in the market, despite the stockpiles and the problems that we're having now, the market is still not what you and I would consider normal. There's still shortages, long-term shortages, I think, in the supply chain for energy around the world. And I think we're probably at a point now where we just wait for the next crisis to come up. And we've got, a couple that we probably ought to talk about. But I think we're just one international incident or a transportation issue away from prices spinning up back out of control.
Yeah, it's amazing how that works. I've always been amazed at how world issues impact the coal industry right here in West Virginia. We've always played very well within global, marketplaces, international marketplaces, given the strong export and demand for West Virginia coal. So you have political unrest and some different things going on in different countries. It really impacts us here. And you're referencing what's going on in Israel and the Middle East right now, and possible invasion of Iran, and all that impacts oil and energy prices.
It does, because in oil, as you know, oil is kind of the global benchmark for all energy demand and energy prices. So, whether or not there's an actual shortage of coal, oil prices, if they elevate like they typically do to unrest in the Middle East, tends to pull up coal prices because it's just another form of energy. But you add into that mix, things that are still daunting the global energy market, like the Ukrainian invasion and tariffs.
2 years ago, just out of nowhere, all of a sudden Russia invades Ukraine. We have the same situation, and all of Europe is trying to transition away from Russia oil and Russia coal, and you had a similar disruption of markets within the whole European community.
Yeah, and that drama still continues to play itself out, even though we tend to think that really happened 2 years ago. The sanctions, the world was so desperate for the coal that Russia was providing. Europe was a huge customer of Russian coal, as you know. That the world was so desperate for that energy that a lot of the sanctions on Russian coal didn't kick in until earlier this year. So all of a sudden, there are shipments of Russian coal that were going to coal consumers that won't be available. So we're watching that very closely. We're also, from our perspective, as this country's largest exporter, that Russian coal will likely find a home once Europe and some of the other countries cut it off. So what will that do to our market? Will it find its way, particularly their metallurgical coal from Russia, the Baltic region of Russia, will it find its way to traditional markets that we typically serve, like India or Egypt, or even certain markets in China and Vietnam and some of the other emerging markets, Korea, that we typically serve?
Just switching gears a little bit, maybe even backing up, something that's been in the news a lot lately, and it kind of fits with what we refer to as the flavor of the day. There's always an issue, a new issue that emerges into the coal business or into the business of mining coal that has impacts. And I want to just reference and talk a little bit about the Port of Baltimore. Out of nowhere, as things seemingly are getting back on track with the railroad and our waterway system, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you have this incident at the Port of Baltimore, that causes major problems, shipping problems for a lot of our producers in the northern part of the state.
Yeah, Chris, that was one. Again, we were just now starting to get back to normal with rail service and port capacity, and then the Francis Scott Key Bridge and the ship incident. And a lot of people don't think that Baltimore is a large port of departure for coal shipments, but it actually, as you know, it actually is. There's 28% of this country's total exports leave Baltimore.
Country's second largest port.
It is. It's just right behind the ports in Virginia. And it's going to have we think it's starting to have an impact on our coal producers, because the northern West Virginia coal operators are obviously physically closer to Baltimore.
Southwestern PA.
Southwestern PA. And it's easier to move that coal to Baltimore than it is, say, take it south through the state of West Virginia, through the state of Virginia to the ports in Virginia or to South Carolina. And the majority of the coal exports from the northern part of our state were destined for Baltimore. And we ship about 10.6 million tons of West Virginia coal through Baltimore. The majority of that's metallurgical coal, and it comes from the billions of dollars of investment over the last 5 years into 3 new metallurgical coal mines in central West Virginia. And that's definitely going to impact their market, because it is met coal, and that particular type of met coal is geared to the international customer. So, it kind of sent us in the coal industry scrambling.
Those are brand new mining operations for all intent and purposes, huge debt services, and and because of the weather patterns and different things, and some rail service issues, stockpiles were pretty much full anyway.
Yes, we were still working our way through the railroad disruptions that we had late last year into this year. And now you sprinkle the Baltimore situation onto that. We're kind of scrambling, and our members are scrambling to divert that coal that was destined for Baltimore to either ports in Virginia, which is where the majority of West Virginia coal goes for export, but even some of the smaller ports throughout the Northeast, take it through the Great Lakes, just trying to relieve that pressure. And of course, given the trend of all industries over the years for our customers, our coal customers, not to stockpile coal. That's especially a sensitive issue for the metallurgical coal consumers, because the longer the coal sits there, its quality degrades. So all of our customers have relied on the supply chain for almost just-in-time delivery of their product. And if you disrupt that, like with Baltimore, where you're weeks, possibly months away from clearing the channel, our customers are in somewhat of a panic mode as well. But so far, I think our railroad partners, and all this coal has to move by rail, practically all of it, 99%.
Both major Class A West Virginia railroads deliver to Baltimore.
Yes, they have service from CSX and Norfolk Southern.
Yes.
So we're working with those same 2 railroads, who also have the ports in Virginia, to get that tonnage diverted. And so far, so good. I'm not going to say it's smooth, but they've shown an overwhelming willingness to add extra crews, add extra capacity, move the train sets around, and even divert some train sets from southern West Virginia up to northern West Virginia to get those trains and that shipments where they need to be. So I think we're dealing the best we can with a very, very difficult situation.
Well, that's unfortunate, very tragic for those directly impacted, had human life, lost there. It's just amazing. And then, so you have a rather intensive investigation by the National Transportation Safety Board. Then you have obvious repair of the bridge. I think it's going to, from what I heard, it may be the middle of May or so before that's opened up to accommodate, maybe even towards the end of May before that's open to accommodate the vessels necessary for coal transportation.
Yeah, and you mentioned, Chris, the investigation. As you know, that's only one part of it. So you have the NTSB, the Coast Guard, probably some level of involvement from the Commerce Department about the investigation. But clearing the channels, largely the responsibility of the Coast Guard and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. And I think there might be a little tension there between the investigative arm, what happened, how it happened, versus the navigation. We have to get the commerce back open, getting the channel cleared.
Speaking of exports, two issues worthy of talking about. One, we're exporting more and more steam coal than we ever have out of West Virginia. And secondly, we're exporting a higher percentage of the state's total output as well.
Yeah, Chris, it was really surprising when we at the association started to run the 2023 distribution numbers where our coal went from the state. And I think certainly for the first time in my career, maybe the first time in history, the amount of coal that was exported internationally was almost equal to the amount of coal that was used domestically in this country. I mean, I think the difference was probably less than 400,000 tons. So, that's not that we are comfortable with the export market in West Virginia. We have always been. And a lot of that, though, has been the overall quality of our metallurgical product. It's just the best anywhere to be found in the world. But on the thermal side, it's a new experience. And even though we're comfortable with the export market, I think as a state, our state leaders, the legislature, the governor, the transportation department here within this state are going to have to start really, really paying attention to how we make sure that our export chain, whether it's transportation, primarily transportation, trucks, trains, and barges, that they really start to pay attention to that, because that's going to be critical, I think, for our market and our survival throughout the 21st century. More and more coal is going to be exported because, while this country seems to be doing everything it can to put a damper on the use of coal, as you know, that's not the case around the world.
No, world coal use and coal production's on the increase.
Yeah, I think we are, if I'm correct, last year in 2023, the world broke a record for coal consumption. And I read some figures, saw some statistics and some analysis that said 2024 is likely to be the same, that the world will use more coal than it ever has before.
And as much coal as we're exporting today, and I believe last count there's about 45 different countries that receive shipments of West Virginia coal. And as you indicate correctly, it accounts for almost half of our total output or production today. The United States still only represents, I believe, 5% of all the coal that's exported.
Yes, sir.
And we account for half of the United States share, close to it, upwards of 40%.
Yep.
But it's still a relatively small percentage of all the seaborne coal that you find out there in ocean ways.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, that's the other thing that's interesting and somewhat frustrating. So, Asia, obviously with China and the growing economies in the Pacific Rim, they're huge coal consumers. But the coal that is closest to them, even though China produces a large amount of coal, far and above what we mine here in this country, they still have to import coal. So they import coal of a lesser quality because it's adjacent to them. Indonesia is the prime thermal coal exporter. Problem is, Indonesian coal has less than half of the heating value of good American or West Virginia coal. And Australia, of course, dominates the metallurgical export coal business. But there's a real concern, not a concern, it's just a dynamic I don't think we've seen before. The metallurgical demand, China remains strong, but India is forecast to become the world's largest steel producer, I think, in another 2 to 5 years. And from an international shipping standpoint, India is about halfway between the eastern ports that our coal leaves this country and the Australian metallurgical coal ports. So it's going to put strain, I think. Australia's reign as the leading metallurgical exporter, I don't think it'll ever go down just because of the volume that they have. But we can compete just as effectively in India as I think Australia can. And then, of course, we have the ongoing drama that we talked about earlier, the loss of Russian metallurgical coal. The Baltic region, the eastern region of Russia, which India has typically been a large Russian met coal consumer.
You know, all that bodes well for the state of West Virginia and our continued commerce to those areas. But it also speaks to the, you know, how sensitive all that is in terms of being influenced by world events. It's a you know, we've always had to factor those things into, you know, the equations of mining and marketing coal internationally here.
Yeah, I mean, coal is it's just as much of a global product as, you know, anything that you could imagine, Amazon or even the automotive industry. It's actually probably even more so because it is, as we were talking earlier, so sensitive to geopolitical upsets and not even an upset, just maybe even a hiccup. And the price of coal can swing $10, $20, and you can go from a relatively stable market to one that's in panic and in a shortage in a quick period of time.
Well, we know coal plants are closing around the country, and you know, we know that a lot of plants that we used to send coal to, whether it be Ohio or down the Carolinas or Tennessee or, you know, even north of us, we ship a lot of coal into Pennsylvania. And again, northern Ohio especially, and a lot of those regions, you know, we have experienced the closure of coal plants or what were end users or consumers of West Virginia coal. We used to ship to 150 power plants east of the Mississippi, 20-some states, and today we're down to about 40 power plants that we ship coal to. So we've lost a tremendous amount of markets within, you know, the eastern part of the country.
Yeah, because just, you know, as we've talked before, the devastating impacts of some of the rules under the Obama administration. And, you know, our production went from 160 million tons to last year roughly 86 million tons. So we were able to find placement for the tons, you know, the remaining power plants that we have, and then of course we pivoted a lot of that internationally. But I think, you know, if you've opened the newspaper or looked at an online news ticker service lately, you have a real concern on behalf of the folks around the country that pull the levers and flip the switches that make the lights and the electricity flow smoothly throughout the country. There's a real concern that the mass closure of those power plants from, say, 2015 forward, especially the coal plants, is really starting to haunt the grid. You've got a skyrocketing demand for electricity from electric vehicles, from data centers, and from artificial intelligence and all the other gee whiz stuff that's coming. And all of a sudden now we don't have the generating capacity to supply that. So you take that with what we expect over the next couple of weeks from the Biden administration, it's going to strain the grid even further. You know, if these rules that you mentioned in your intro ultimately come to fruition, then that'll wipe out another half, if not more, of the remaining coal generation way before it was ever scheduled to come off for economic or mechanical reasons.
Well, one of the main proposals that'll be finalized here within the next week or two, you know, we heard earlier today and yesterday, is the carbon rule. You know, the administration, EPA's final carbon rule, which basically require coal-fired utilities to begin constructing carbon sequestration systems in conjunction with their coal burn. And that just doesn't seem quite ready for prime time. Then you have all the questions that surround the geological formations in this area. And it just raises the questions whether our utilities here in West Virginia are going to be able to meet those standards.
Yeah, and I think that's a valid concern around the country because, you know, coal plants, even though we think of them as big lumbering pieces of infrastructure, which they are, but because of the pollution control equipment that have been attached to those plants to address other things. You know, as you know, we've reduced emissions from coal-fired generation by almost 96% from, say, 1970 or so, what we would consider traditional air quality parameters. But because of the application of all that equipment, these plants aren't the lumbering infrastructure that we think of them as. They're actually finely tuned Swiss watches.
They are, and they're fully compliant.
Fully
I
compliant.
mean, they comply with every, what we would call real concerning type air emissions. When you talk about sulfur, when you talk about mercury, when you talk about the ozone, you know, levels and all. I mean, they are fully compliant. They are equipped, technologically advanced to meet all of those controls and standards. But they emit a little bit of carbon dioxide. And you could argue whether that's a pollutant or not from a technical standpoint. But, you know, the industry, our country has made great reductions over the past couple of decades with respect to its overall carbon emissions.
It has.
And that's going to continue as technology advances and becomes perfected. But yeah, I think what we're really seeing with this rule is a conversion or a forced conversion of you know, electrical generation systems.
It is. And, you know, your point about how much effort the mechanical investment and the physical and financial investment, billions of dollars to make these plants compliant with the most stringent standards found anywhere in the planet. These plants are shining examples. I would challenge anyone to go to any developed country or undeveloped country for that matter, including some of those in Europe that pride themselves on being the greenest of the green, and find plants that are cleaner than the coal plants in the United States of America that burn coal. It's just not there. They don't exist. We've done it in this country. And that is what makes this latest onslaught of rules from the federal government so offensive, is they've confronted us with the one thing that technology has yet to solve. So like you said, it'll be a forced conversion. And I think the other thing that's an offense to those of us that live in mining areas or you have coal-fired power plants like West Virginia is this is EPA's third try at this. The Supreme Court, you know, the ultimate arbiter of the law of the land, has told EPA 3 times before, you can't do this. You, EPA, can't regulate the electric grid. That responsibility belongs to others. So this is another swipe at that, where they're going to regulate electric from the power generation facility all the way to the power plug in your home and force that generation shifting. And we all know, just from, I think, common sense, that some of the renewable resources or the intermittent sources that they're trying to push us to, that's why they're called intermittent sources. They don't work all the time. Power demand doesn't go away just because the sun went down necessarily.
Well, that's the other aspect of this. You know, it seems like there's been a lot of warnings that have been given to EPA and this administration that there's way too many coal plants that have closed. And the point made there is that's baseload generation. You know, intermittent energy forms does not provide baseload generation. You know, even your natural gas plants have difficulty with the pressure issue in inclement weather. And so not as reliable as coal-fired generation.
No.
And I understand that whether it's been, you know, a warning by FERC or by NERC or one of the regional grid operators, PJM, MISO, EPA is just, it's fallen on deaf ears. EPA is not responding or reacting. So consequently, you have the security or integrity of the national electric grid being pierced
Yeah, 'cause
here and compromised.
it really is amazing, Chris, when you think about it. You know, coal has an attribute that is only shared by nuclear energy, and that is we have a physical stockpile of fuel on the ground. So if there is a disruption in a supply chain, then the plant operator, the plant owner looks out of his window and looks at this coal pile and says, okay, even though there's been a train derailment, there's been a bridge collapse, whatever, I know that I have 15, 30, 45 days worth of solid fuel on the ground. Gas plants don't have that. That is their major Achilles heel, and that's why they suffer in extreme weather or if there is a disruption in a pipeline. The intermittent sources are just that. They don't come on when the lights are off or when the sun goes down or when the wind dies off. And you know, windmills could even be impacted, as can solar panels, by snow and ice. So coal and nuclear share that attribute, true defined baseload generation. And yet at every step, EPA, who doesn't have an appreciation, I think, for the fragility of the nation's electric grid, continues to chip away at our baseload generation.
Well, there's no question. I think this administration places its climate goals ahead of the safeness and security of the nation's electric grid. So when you see that type of aggressiveness there, then there are some things that suffer, and unfortunately is the electric ecosystem as we know it, and the coal-fired generation.
And you know, Chris, at some point it becomes an economic issue, because you know despite who is in the White House, there has been a move, I think, over the years to reshore manufacturing in this country, because COVID revealed the defects in the supply chain, global supply chain. But heavy industry needs lots of power, and if you can't guarantee that power consistently 24 hours a day, that industry's not going to relocate.
Plus, we're bringing on all these electric cars, all these new data centers, and artificial intelligence. All these things are going to consume a lot more power than what we have today.
And that's without trying to reshore heavy industry that unfortunately we shipped to China and Mexico and other places.
Jason, this has been a great discussion. I really appreciate you taking time from your schedule to break loose to join us on the set here today. With all these rules and the impact on West Virginia, about to be revealed in the next couple of weeks, we'll have you back on here real soon to talk about the implications. But with that, we're going to have to say goodbye here, and want to thank everybody for tuning into the Coal Scene today. Thank you.